All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about a war from the 1850s, which, I know, might sound like just another dusty history lesson. But this conflict, fought over this tiny peninsula in the Black Sea, was way more than that. It was this brutal, head-on collision between the old world and the new. And believe it or not, its aftershocks pretty much created the modern world we live in today.
So, back in London, this was the kind of song you'd hear on the streets. It was the soundtrack to the war that was coming. You can just feel the confidence, right? It's super patriotic, almost cheerful. And fun fact, this song actually gave us the word jingoism. The public really thought that war was this glorious adventure, a chance to flex the muscles of the British Empire.
Yeah, but the reality of this war, it was going to be something else entirely. We're talking about a story of total mismanagement, of disease, and of suffering on an industrial scale, and all of it was being reported back home with this shocking brand new speed. That glorious adventure? It turned into a national crisis, and fast.
So how did this whole thing even start? Well, on the surface, it kicked off with a very traditional, very old-fashioned squabble between the great powers over land and influence.
I mean, listen to this quote from the Russian Tsar. It's incredibly blunt. He's talking about the Ottoman Empire, which was once this huge power, but by now it was getting weaker and weaker, earning the nickname the sick man of Europe. This created a power vacuum, and Russia saw its chance to push south and get control of the Black Sea. All the big players in Europe were asking the same thing. What do we do about the Ottomans? This was the famous Eastern question.
Things escalated really quickly. Russia used the protection of Orthodox Christians as an excuse to move troops into Ottoman lands. The Ottomans, feeling like Britain and France had their back, went ahead and declared war. But here's the thing. Britain and France didn't jump in just to save the Ottomans. They did it to stop Russia. They were terrified that if Russia got too powerful, it would upset the whole delicate balance of power that had, more or less, kept the peace in Europe since Napoleon.
Okay, and this is where our story really takes a turn. Because while the reasons for the war were old, the way it was fought was shockingly, brutally new. It was a complete collision of centuries. Now, what's so fascinating here is the sheer disconnect you see. I mean, just imagine this. The British Army was being led by generals whose last big battle was Waterloo, almost 40 years earlier. They showed up in these flashy, brightly colored uniforms that looked great on a parade ground, but their tactics were ancient, and they were about to run headfirst into the grim realities of industrial warfare, logistical collapse, and a press that was watching their every move. And a huge part of this new reality was technology, like the Minié bullet. This wasn't your old-school round musket ball. This was a cone-shaped bullet fired from a rifled barrel, which made it unbelievably accurate and deadly at ranges they had never seen before. It didn't just hit you, it tore through flesh and shattered bone, which meant that old tactics like charging in a tight formation were now basically an act of mass suicide.
And this quote just perfectly captures the mindset of the public back home. You have to remember, decades of relative peace had made people forget what a war between major powers actually looked like. Young men were signing up for adventure and glory, and they were completely unprepared for the industrial-scale slaughter that was waiting for them.
But here's the most shocking part. The biggest killer in the Crimean War wasn't a bullet. It was disease. Get this, for every one soldier killed in combat, 10 more died from illnesses like cholera, typhus, and dysentery. The army was brilliant at marching information, but it was utterly unprepared to feed, house, and keep itself healthy in the field. And this absolute catastrophe, it would end up sparking a revolution.
And that revolution was led by a woman who would become a total legend, but maybe not for the reasons you think. We all remember Florence Nightingale as the lady with the lamp, the caring nurse. But her most powerful weapon? It was data.
So when Nightingale and her team of nurses arrived at the main British hospital at Scutari, the conditions were just horrifying. The whole building was basically built on top of a giant cesspool. Men were lying in their own filth on the floor, suffering from rampant infections and total neglect. It wasn't a place of healing, it was a factory of death.
Nightingale didn't just walk around comforting soldiers. No, she was a brilliant administrator and a data analyst. She saw the chaos and immediately acted, organizing sanitation, getting clean bedding, better food. But, and this is the most important part, she collected data, meticulous, detailed records on what was actually killing these soldiers. She was absolutely determined to prove it.
And Nightingale's true genius wasn't just in collecting the data, it was in presenting it. This chart here is a modern version of her famous polar area diagram. She created these striking visuals to show the politicians back in London, in a way they simply could not ignore, that the real enemy wasn't the Russians, it was the filth. By proving its sanitation reform saved lives, she became a pioneer in using data visualization to drive massive social change. Just incredible.
So, at the exact same time, another modern revolution was unfolding. The media was starting to change how the public saw war, and this created a whole new kind of challenge for the government.
You see, thanks to the new telegraph, reports from the front lines by guys like William Howard Russell of the Times newspaper were hitting London in a matter of days, not weeks. And he wasn't some government mouthpiece. He wrote about the logistical nightmares and the awful suffering of the soldiers. The public was reading this, and they were enraged. Suddenly, the government had a massive public relations crisis on its hands.
So what do? They turned to a brand new technology, photography. A photographer named Roger Fenton was sent out to the Crimea. And his job, which was sponsored by a publisher with government backing, was basically to counteract all the negative press. He took hundreds of photos, generals posing heroically, tidy-looking camps, quiet landscapes, but you'll never see combat, death, or suffering in his work. Part of that was the technical limits of his slow camera, sure, but it was also his political mission.
This is maybe his most famous picture. He gave it this really haunting title, but the photo itself is, well, it's sterile. It shows the aftermath. You see the cannonballs scattered all over the road, but it doesn't show the human cost. The horror is implied, but it's kept safely out of the frame. It's what you don't see that really tells the story here.
And that brings us to this really fascinating question, one that is still so relevant today. Fenton's work was groundbreaking, no doubt. It was the first systematic photographic record of a war. But was it journalism, trying to show the truth? Or was it propaganda, designed to manage a story? From the very beginning, that line was blurry.
So, at the end of the day, this messy, horribly mismanaged war, a war fought for old-world reasons, accidentally became a laboratory for the modern age, and its impact would be felt for generations to come.
So when you look back, what did all this bloody chaos leave us with? Well, it sparked the birth of professional nursing and data-driven public health, thanks to Nightingale. It created war reporting and photojournalism, which in turn forced governments to invent PR and media management to deal with it. For the very first time, the press really discovered its power to hold governments accountable. And on the world stage, the war totally shattered that delicate balance of power that had held Europe together since Napoleon, basically setting the stage for the even bigger wars that were on the horizon.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The struggle to control the story of war began with Roger Fenton and his carefully staged photographs. Fast forward to today, with billions of smartphones and instant global social media, that challenge is infinitely more complex. How we see conflict and who gets to tell its story is a question that really got its start right there in the mud of Crimea.